Okay, so on the first chart here with your title is a map. It's the whole thing, Caribbean too, but we're just going to be talking about Central America. What do they call Central America? That connects. It's a vocabulary word. Connects North America to South America. It's an isthmus, and an isthmus is what? What is an isthmus? Mason?
It's a smaller land that connects two large lands.
Yep. So thin and narrow, like so, connects two larger land areas. So Central America connects North and South America. We're going to go, today we'll get with early history through the independence, and we'll get started most likely on culture. We'll see how far we get, if we can get any farther than that. But we are going to start a little bit with history. And there's three major groups that have really influenced the history of Central America. And what are those three groups that have influenced it? Remember, we talked about one group that started way long ago. Jimmy?
The Maya, Spanish, and U.S.
Yeah, so the Maya, which were here pretty much first in the early, 250 AD was when they really were at their height. The Spanish came over 1500s, and then the United States has also influenced their history, and we'll get into how the United States has been part of this. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later. So you've got the Maya, Spanish, and U.S. who have all influenced the history. So you will notice that different parts of their country, their culture, their religion, language, those things, all will tie back to one of these three things. So let's go into the early part. And the first group of people we studied this year was the Maya. So the Maya were there around 250 AD was when they were really big. That was the height of their civilization, their empire. And when was it when pretty much most people started abandoning them? They started to fall, their empire. What year was that when they started to kind of just collapse completely, the Maya? It's right there in your book. When did they collapse? Maddie?
900.
In about 900. So they had these cities with pyramids and temples, but they weren't torn down, they weren't destroyed. People just started to abandon them, and like we talked about earlier this year, we're not quite sure the major reason why. But if you were to go there today, a lot of these ruins are still there. What's a ruin? It's a ruin, Harmon.
Remains of a big structure.
It's just the remains, the leftovers. They're still there, so they might not be perfect like they were when they built them, but they're still left over. You can still see pyramids still standing and temples still standing, and some of their entire cities are still standing, so you can go visit a lot of these places. And these ruins, the Maya ruins, is what attracts a lot of tourists to Central America. Okay? Even though the Maya left, you can still go to certain areas in Central America and still see people that have kind of Maya descent. And where in Central America could you find people that have a little bit of Maya history in their ancestors? They had Maya ancestors. Where could you go, Tomes? Guatemala or Belize. You could go to those places today, and you would find some people that have some form of Maya descent there. A lot of Maya culture or customs are still followed here, and they still influence their modern time, even today. So our early history up through about 900 are the Maya people were there. And then you've got some other Indian groups that were around as well. But then in the 1500s, who comes along? Who came along in the early 1500s? What group of people came over? It's one of these three, probably. Jimmy? The Spanish. So in the early 1500s, here come the Spanish across the ocean, and they want to take control, pretty much. So the Spanish come over, they claim pretty much most of the region, except for England came over too around the same time. England only claimed a little bit in Central America, and which area did England claim? What part did England claim? Take a look on 62. We'll try to see what part did England claim, which is Britain, same thing. Katerina?
Belize and part of Nicaragua, west coast.
Yep, so they came over, got Belize and a little bit of Nicaragua's coast, but Spain took over the rest of Central America. And when they come over there, they started to establish these large plantations, and what are some of the crops that they grew while here in Central America? Mason?
Tobacco and sugarcane.
Tobacco, sugarcane. So they established, and you'll want to get this, that they established a lot of large plantations. The map on the right shows you kind of some of the routes that they took to get over here from Spain, and they made many stops in the Caribbean, which they called the West Indies, and they worked their way here into Central America. Plantation, which is hard to see for you guys on the left, that would be a plantation. So they come over here, and they don't want to work in their own plantations. They want someone else to do their work for them. So who do they have working in their plantations, in their fields? Mason? They brought over slaves from Africa, so they've got some slaves. So they made some stops, and actually a lot of slaves there were some Africans working here in the Caribbean. They made some stops in Africa, so they brought over some enslaved Africans, and they were working in the fields. And who else did they force to work in the fields that was already there? Maddie?
The Central American Indians.
The Central American Indians that were already there, they forced them to work in their fields and their plantations and some gold mines that they had, because remember, they came over thinking that there was going to be gold. There wasn't much gold. Oops, I think I went backwards. Okay, so, and what we said a little bit ago was Britain came over and claimed part of Nicaragua's coast. So, actually, this would be Britain or England. I'm going to just put England, and probably this. But the rest of it, Spain takes control of the rest of it. Alright, so all of it is influenced by Spanish culture, and if you were to go to Belize today, you'd see a lot of English heritage, and they would even speak English in Belize. That's actually their official language, but the rest, Spanish. Okay, so this is between probably 1500s and 1800s, where they've got the plantations, they've got the Indians working, they've got the slaved Africans working. They're establishing settlements and creating colonies and getting homes and all this good stuff, and then all of a sudden these people in, well, Central America think, well, we don't want to be controlled by Spain. They had heard about the United States gaining their independence from England back in 1776, and they thought, that's a good idea. So they kind of decided they would like to be independent themselves from Spain. So why don't you take a look at that first column on 63 about the independence. Find out when they gained their independence and kind of what it looked like just immediately after that. So just that first left-hand column on page 63, find out when they got it. It's a little different. Jane, you have a question or you want to answer? Give me a second. I'll have some other people look through it. All right, Shane, when did they get their independence?
1981.
Not all of Central America. There was one country that got it in 1981, but most of the rest of the countries got it in what year? Anybody? Tomes?
1821.
1821. That is when Central America declared its independence from Spain. They kind of remained joined together, though, and they called themselves what? What did they call themselves? They weren't kind of yet individual countries. They were still joined together, Tomes.
United Provinces.
The United Provinces of Central America. So that was about 1821. Tell me about... Okay, so after that, then some countries kind of broke apart. The countries of Costa Rica, they became themselves. Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, they kind of separated from each other and became their own small countries. And they, that was from 1838 to 1839, and then they kind of joined back together as this United Provinces. But Panama was a little different. We know Panama is part of Central America today, but what is, tell me about Panama. And when all these countries got their independence in 1821, what happened to Panama? Mason?
Panama remained part of Colombia until 1903.
Yeah, Panama wasn't part of that independence in 1821. They stayed part of Colombia, which is South America. So they stayed part of Colombia until about 1903 when they decided they wanted to be their own country and broke away from Colombia. So 1821, most countries in Central America independent from Spain. Panama stays with Colombia. What about Belize? Belize wasn't being controlled by Spain, so they didn't become independent. They were being controlled by what country? Who controlled Belize? Gavin? Britain. And when was it that they became independent? 1981. So Belize then doesn't become independent. And they're fine. They didn't, it wasn't like they were being controlled poorly. They just weren't ready for it. If a country wants to be independent, what do they need to be able to be an independent country? What are some things they probably should have before they go out and say, let's do it? Mason? A government. So they probably have to make sure that they're able to form a government. What else? Think about what countries need to survive. Mason? An economy, good economy, so
And
currency, so money, and for the economy they might need some good resources. What about protection?
country doesn't have an army?
Army. What country doesn't have protection?
Yeah.
Actually, Costa Rica does not have an army. Only country that doesn't have an army is Costa Rica, and they actually do just fine without that army. They put their money elsewhere. When we get to Costa Rica, we'll talk about that more. Here is what it kind of looked like, right, as independence was going. The green, those are the countries that became independent in 1821. So green would, green, 1821. Blue down here, this is Panama, and they stayed part of Colombia, and up here, this was England until 1981. They got their independence. Okay. And then today, looks like this. For the most part, there's some. This is showing you what Central America went through, and from each year, you had your Yucatan all the way up to these different places. They have their own Central America flag. Today, each country has their own individual flag, which we'll kind of look at those flags once we get to them. Okay, so since independence, though, there was really no change. They just were free from Spain. So instead of Spain controlling them, who controls everybody now in Central America right after independence? Take a look on 63 on the left-hand side. Who controls them? Who controls everything, really? Who runs the country? Who runs the economy in Central America? Before it was Spain. Who now, Natalie?
Wealthy landowners.
Wealthy. The wealthy landowners. They pretty much, it was still like that when Spain controlled them. Just Spain was overseeing everybody. Well, nothing really changed. The wealthy landowners continue to run the country. They still run the economy. Bananas and coffee are really what controls their economy. Well, in the early to mid-1900s, a company came along called the United Fruit Company. Who brought this company to Central America? It's on the right-hand side of 63. Who brought this company? Mason? So the United States brought the United Fruit Company. So the United States, a small group of people that were from the United States, came down to Central America and started a business. Because most people in Central America were poor and they weren't able to start a business. And so a group of people from the United States comes down and sets up this company, and what are they producing, the United Fruit Company? What fruit are the United Fruit Company producing? Something you probably eat quite a bit. Mason? Bananas. They controlled pretty much all of the banana production in Central America. That meant they had to own a lot of land in Central America in order to get these bananas. But they didn't have the United States people controlled the business, but the workers were all people from Central America. All right? And some people were happy the United States brought this company over. Some people were very upset that the United States brought this over. There are positives that came along with this company, and there are negatives that came along with this company. Take a look at the right-hand side, and why don't you look at the positives and negatives and be able to share those with me in a second. Positives and negatives. All right, tell me some positives of this United Fruit Company. Toms?
They develop railroads and port facilities. It helps transportation and communication.
There you be. Because they needed to be able to transport bananas from place to place, get them to the different facilities, they had to develop facilities, number one, and they had to develop railroads to transport these goods. So it helped the transportation throughout Central America, because remember, the land is rugged, and they can't afford to do it. So the United States came down and did it for them, so it improved transportation, and it also improved communication. But, like I said, there were a lot of people who were very, very unhappy that this company came over there. Why were they upset? What were some negatives about this? What were some negatives? And that's the part you were reading as well. What would be some negatives? Jimmy?
Few people could own so much land when so many people were poor and
Yeah.
didn't have any land.
Few people, and that kind of goes both of them. Few people owned land, because who owned most of the land? Who owned most of the United Fruit Company? The U.S. And so they thought, this isn't fair. You've got this United States people coming down, owning most of our land, while most of us are struggling to make a living. That just didn't seem fair to them. They were really upset. And they tried to get things changed throughout, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. And that led to struggles, and it led to fighting amongst them and some civil wars, which we'll talk about most likely tomorrow, I imagine. But people weren't happy with the United States coming down and doing this. But the United States saw it as a way to make money, since they didn't have these companies down there anyway. So the United States thought, this is perfect. We can go down, we can set up a company, and export bananas all around the world. All right, flip it over to 64. And let's get into culture. Culture are things such as people, religion, food, sports, music, language, festivals. All of that stuff are things, when you hear the word culture, those are all of the things that would be included under culture. So we're going to talk about the different cultures that came around and have been influenced by the different people that were there. So we'll start with people. And you will notice that most of the culture is influenced by Spanish, because the Spanish came over and conquered pretty much everything. But England, there's some English influences, there's some Maya influences still, and even U.S. influences. So if you were to go down to Central America, what type of people would you probably run into? What are the different type of people you would see there? What kind of people? Natalie?
Mestizos.
You'd see mestizos. What's a mestizo? What is a mestizo? Mason?
Mixed European and Indian.
The mixed, so you have a European mixed in with Indian. That's a mestizo. What other types of people, various people, would you see, Tomes?
Indians.
Indians, most likely from Maya descent. And the other big one that you would see, the other large group of people that you would see, Natalie?
Africans.
you would see some Africans as well. So you're going to see mestizos, which is mostly the biggest population. And if you look down at that picture on 64, 65, a lot of those ladies in the marketplace are mestizos, or even the Maya descent, which kind of looks similar, which is the dark skin. But you would see the Africans too, because how did the Africans get over to Central America again? Harmon?
Slavery.
They came over, they were slaves. Right. People that have some sort of Maya descent would most likely be living in Guatemala. Africans make up a very small portion. They're just a minority there. But mostly they would live along the coast because they never worked their way inland after they were brought over as slaves. So they stay along the coast, the Caribbean coast, that is. So here's people. That's part of culture. Language. What are languages? You go down there, what kind of languages are you going to hear? What kind of languages would you hear down in the, Central America? Jimmy?
Spanish and English.
Spanish, you're going to hear English, and maybe one more you might hear, Mason? The Native Indian. Which one is the official language? Harmon?
Spanish.
Spanish. Official. I would write that official language next to it so you know that's the official language. But English is an official language somewhere. Which one is English? Mason? Belize. And most likely a lot of people would be speaking Native Indian because it's kind of just been brought down. But mostly a lot in Guatemala you would hear it definitely. But it's kind of been around. Alright, so the official language in Belize is English. Everywhere else it is Spanish. And most likely those people in Belize are gonna probably speak both English and Spanish. Most people probably speak multiple languages there with the Indian dialect as well. Okay, so two parts of culture. The third part of culture would be the religion. Most Central American people practice the religion that was brought over by the Europeans. So what are the two major religions that have been brought over by the Europeans, or the Spanish and English? Harmon?
Christianity.
Yeah? Christianity, but that's pretty widespread. Don? Catholic. And then the other one, which kind of goes with Christianity, Protestant Christians. So Catholicism's, which Roman Catholic is what the Spanish missionaries came over and basically forced the Indians to learn. The Spanish didn't want the Indians to keep their religions and culture, so they forced them to learn Catholicisms. But there are still Indian traditions around that they kept. So Catholicism is the big one. I would probably put a star. I think I spelled no, I think I spelled it right. This is the big one. That's the major one. And then the Protestant is kind of starting to become a little bit bigger throughout places like Belize. All right. So there's your religions. So you've got people, language, religion. All these things are part of culture. And then you also have things such as festivals. Did you not get it all? I'll go back. There you go. All right, festivals. We celebrate Christmas. That's a festival for us. All right, they have many festivals and things that they celebrate yearly as well. And did you get it?
Yeah.
All right. What are some things, some major things, we don't have to go through all of them, but what are some major things that in Central America are celebrated because they're of high importance?
Day of Dead.
That's Mexico. Which, by the way, isn't that coming up? When is it? Friday and Saturday. Maybe we can have a Day of the Dead celebration with Healthy Kids Act food. So we can't have the candy that they have. Jimmy, what do they celebrate?
Easter.
Easter. That is a very important holiday. Remember, they are Roman Catholics, So Easter is huge. They celebrate. They decorate entire towns. They have parades. They make flowers representing, on crosses for Jesus and things like that. They probably don't do as much of the Easter Bunny as we do. They celebrate it the religious way. And what else will they celebrate throughout the year? What else will they celebrate throughout the year? They have saints' days, different saints' days. For instance, St. Patrick is a saint. Do we celebrate that? It's on our calendar. We kind of celebrate it. We don't celebrate it probably like they do. We celebrate it by getting all dressed up in green and having fun. They celebrate it by celebrating the saint himself, where they have parades in the streets. They have images of St. Patrick himself going through the streets. And so any other saint throughout the year, if it's a saint day, they will celebrate it. And actually on November 1st, the day after Halloween, is what they call All Saints Day, where they celebrate people who have died within the last year. Anyone go to church? Jimmy, at church on Sunday, they'll have All Saints Day. So pay attention. And then say to your dad, hey, I learned about that in school. All right. Food. Oh, it's my favorite part. Me too. I forgot to eat my breakfast because I was out at duty outside. All right. They, especially during their festivals, they have traditional foods that they probably eat. And a lot of their food is kind of shared with what it's like in Mexico. So their food is very, very similar to what it's like in Mexico. And why would that be? Why would they have food similar to what it's like in Mexico? Mason? Okay, climate. What else?
Because they were both influenced by Spanish.
Both influenced by Spanish. Good. So what are some traditional foods that they would eat? Maybe we could have some of you make these things for projects or something later, but what are some traditional foods that they eat? Braylon?
Corn, tomatoes, hot peppers, and cocoa.
Yes. And what is that? Cacao. That's how you say it.
Which is a source of chocolate.
Chocolate. Yummy. Comes from a plant. It's interesting to see. So you've got tomatoes, hot peppers, cacao. Those are big things. Corn. But they have lots of different traditional foods. Now, they all have markets. Here's a traditional market on 64 and 65, where they have all of these fresh vegetables and fruits that people can go to. They can go all around. They can buy food, sell food. They have, in the background, you can see one with different masks that would be used for different celebrations and festivals that they have. So you can get to a traditional market probably daily down here because of it being so nice weather. I love markets like that. The farmer's market. You guys go to the farmer's market? I love the farmer's market. Okay, what are we talking about for time? I don't want to get too far ahead of the other class. I'm going to stop there because I want to talk more.